Ukrainian street protests worked in that President Zelenskyy was forced to fire his Soviet-trained top general Syrskyi from his post as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces. He was replaced by a younger man. But that is only half of what the people wanted. What they wanted most was Mykhailo Fedorov returned to the job as Minister of Defense. He was credited with corruption busting inside the ministry that spends most of the country's money in the middle of a war against Russia, giving the troops better, faster access to the weapons they need to fight the Russian invasion. So why not just give him his job back? Why is it not more simple and more desirable for the Ukrainian president to have Mykhailo Fedorov in a position he knows and, by all accounts, was successful in? But it's also important to understand the effect of this political crisis and what effect it will have on the people of Ukraine at a time they don't get to vote. 43-year-old Fedorov was largely responsible for its push to massively upscale drone production and use. And if the people want him, trust him, and believe he is a crucial part of defending their country and, by extension, their lives, has this become an issue of trust in the government at a moment Ukraine does appear to have genuine momentum? Well, our correspondent in Kyiv is Nick Connolly. Nick, we're usually talking about the fight at or near the front lines. Now it's political. If Zelenskyy hasn't reinstated Fedorov after more than a week of protests from people who want that to happen, what are the chances he's going to do it at all now?
Certainly, it looks very difficult now how Zelenskyy would explain that he would then, revise that decision, go back on it, especially since he's put Yevgeny Khmara, someone with a very storied military career, in as acting minister with the expectation that he will then be confirmed as the full-time Minister of Defense. But certainly this is a kind of crisis of his own making. He hasn't explained to the country why it is he got rid of Fedorov. That kind of tale at the beginning of this crisis, that it was all about the conflict with the top general Syrskyi, who's now also been fired, didn't really convince anyone. And as the time goes on, there's more and more kind of conspirology about why exactly Fedorov was taken out of the job after getting basic rave reviews from Ukraine's international partners and people in the military.
Yeah, I mean, Fedorov is young. He gave the strong impression of competence, seen as an effective person in that position. It seems like the case for returning him to the post is so strong. What are we missing? You say he hasn't made much of a case. Has he clearly made any case as to why he's not just put him back in the job?
So we had early on those words from the president about the conflict with Syrskyi. Zelenskyy saying basically that Syrskyi and Fedorov would not talk to each other unless Zelenskyy, the president, was basically pulling them to the same table and forcing them to engage with one another. But obviously that issue is now gone. Syrskyi is gone. In his stead, there is now Mykhailo Drapate, a general, we understand, who gets on well with Fedorov, so there would be no conflict there. As time has gone on, we've had lots of stories based on off-the-record briefings and kind of anonymous sources saying that this is also about cash. In the middle of a war, obviously, the military budget is by far the biggest slice of cash in the Ukrainian government treasury, and there are billions and billions of euros, lots of it coming from Europe, that are to be handed out in contracts. And just yesterday we've had a story in one of Ukraine's top newspapers, Ukrainska Pravda, saying that it was also lobbying from basically one of Ukraine's biggest Miltech startups, Firepoint, that have produced some of the kind of long-range drones we've been seeing in recent weeks, that they were basically seeing a future where they would get a smaller share of the pie than they were expecting, and that they also used their connections to the Zelenskyy team to basically lobby for his ouster.
Russia unironically uses the spectre of corruption to wave over Ukraine in this case and in others, saying Ukraine is a corrupt country, and this is an example of it. Do Ukrainians feel, Nick, that their country is corrupt? And does this refusal of Zelenskyy to return a man aggressively fighting against it make them feel their president is working hard enough to stop corruption?
I mean, certainly the thing you'll hear from people here is, when have we had the need to go out and protest, right? When have we had this kind of internal policy crisis, so much so that the kind of compromise consensus that has existed since this war began to kind of leave politics for the future and to basically rally behind the flag and the president, that has kind of been paused and people have actually been willing to have that fight. That was last summer, basically a year ago to the day, when the Zelenskyy team was basically going to strip Ukraine's anti-corruption organizations, its government bodies, of their independence. back then, with the help of those protests and a lot of pressure from Brussels and elsewhere, it was possible to stop that happening. Now we've got Fedorov out, and obviously this time Brussels is not going to get involved in the same way, because this is very obviously a kind of internal Ukrainian personnel decision that is not up to Ukraine's foreign partners, as much as they maybe liked working with Fedorov, to decide who is in charge of the Ministry of Defense. And there is a sense that Zelenskyy is getting himself into these unnecessary problems, these kind of conflicts with civil society, with the kind of more reforming wing of Ukrainian kind of public life, when it is about cash and the interests of people close to him. Last year, there was the kind of anticipation that those anti-corruption bodies would be coming after Yermak, his chief of staff, and indeed that did happen a few months later. And looking back, people said that was why he was allowing that attack on the anti-corruption institutions. This time around, this now kind of interpretation that it was about Fedorov getting too close to revising defense contracts and reapportioning them in a way that's maybe more effective for the country but less financially lucrative for people with political connections. So there is a real worry about that yet. So far, people aren't criticizing Zelenskyy directly. They aren't calling for his resignation or any kind of more direct attack. It's more an attack on the people around Zelenskyy, the people behind the kind of oust of Fedorov. But I think if this carries on, if there's no real explanation to the public why this is happening, if the Parliament doesn't get involved — Parliament is currently on vacation. Puzzlingly, no one here understands how it could be that the Parliament just leaves for the summer vacation without resolving these things. I think this could get politically more dangerous for Zelenskyy.
Yeah, we talk a lot about morale in terms of the troops on the front line, Nick. Have you seen any evidence that this episode is affecting, in a big way, the morale of the people, or might they grow to accept the generational change that Zelenskyy has made in generals, from Syrskyi to the party that you talked about, that they've at least achieved part of what they wanted here?
I think it's really difficult to predict how this will go and if people will at some point lose interest, right? We've got these protests going on every night at 8 p.m. in Kyiv and also in other cities. For now, they are going on every night. And some of the demands are kind of widening, demands for some of the new ministers who've come in this new cabinet to lose their jobs. I think the kind of bigger thing here, though, is I think you're right. This isn't just about Fedorov. This is about a sense that reforms are being delayed, that Zelenskyy, when push comes to shove, chooses the status quo over reforms that might be dangerous to vested interests, might rock the boat, might endanger financial interests, all those kind of things. And I think there is a sense now, when you speak to people, that Ukraine just can't afford to postpone these reforms even longer. That a small country comparatively compared to Russia cannot afford to wage war the same way that Russia does. The kind of slogan is: a small Soviet army won't beat a big Soviet army. Ukraine has to be more innovative and more nimble if it wants to win. And there is a kind of real lack of patience and a kind of unwillingness to kind of go along with whatever the president wants. We've seen it also from Fedorov, right, who's refused those kind of advisor jobs that many here see as basically a fig leaf that wouldn't actually give him any power to do anything and would just be a kind of face-saving off-ramp. And I think there's a sense now that people, especially in the army, who've been very critical of the management of the army in recent months, who really felt that Fedorov was making a difference, was finally allowing Ukraine to fight in a different way, that they are not going to back down for now.
Nick, we know it's a busy time for reporting on all that's going on the front lines of the war, and now these fronts opening up at a political level in Ukraine. We really appreciate you talking us through the latest today. Thanks so much. Well, Tetiana Shevchuk is a lawyer and a spokesperson of the Anti-Corruption Centre in Ukraine. Great to have you with us. It's been 9 days since Mykhailo Fedorov was dismissed. The protests continue against the move taken by President Zelenskyy. Are you losing some hope that he will be reinstated as Minister of Defense?
We understand that probably it's politically difficult, and President Zelenskyy didn't show any hint that he is ready to reinstall Mr. Fedorov back to the position of Minister of Defense. He suggested him various other positions around the government. However, if we were to lose hope, we would not go to the streets anymore. So I think people have the hope that they will be heard, and that the situation will be returned to something that we had 2 weeks ago.
Tetiana, is there a fear among the people that this political standoff could legitimately slow the defence reforms that Fedorov was leading, or are those reforms in motion now to the extent that they have momentum and that they're bigger than that one individual?
Precisely because people fear that reforms will be stalled and that will influence our position on the battlefield, that will influence the defense of the cities from the ballistic attacks and missile attacks. That's the reason people are going to the streets. So it's not the support of one politician or one person, it's mostly support of the right approach Mr. Fedorov had to this job. Therefore, protest continues.
How much of these protests do you attribute to concerns about corruption? Corruption is often cited as a problem, but it's also a word from the toolkit of Russian propaganda. How much has this whole incident, do you think, made the Ukrainian people worry that their president is not determined enough to stop corruption in his government?
People fear that corruption will get into the defense procurement if Mr. Fedorov will not return to his position and will not continue the reforms he started. It's very hard to talk about corruption in defense procurement because this is very closed sphere, and also there is understanding that corruption in that field means death of the people, because either soldiers would not get enough weapons or equipment they need, or this equipment would be of low quality. The same comes with air defense. So the ousting of Mr. Fedorov was a signal that those attempts to reform this field could stop. Of course, it had not enough time passed to know exactly, but that acting Minister of Defense, Mr. Hmara, he is a military guy, military officer with no experience in politics, in managing something like big like a ministry, comparing to Fedorov. Therefore, people fear that something will be happening behind his back.
And so you say the protests will continue, and if we take it that Fedorov won't be returned, what should or what can President Zelenskyy do now to restore confidence without appearing to be governed by protest?
I think this is a kind of withdrawn paradigm saying that president should fear of being governed by the protest. I think it's vice versa. The president will show his strengths if he listens to the people. We don't have elections. We don't have a lot of democratic space because of wartime, and listening to the people is the core of the democracy. So I think this is that some people who are trying to block return of Mr. Fedorov are trying to play this, strengths game, saying that, there should not be a return of Mr. Fedorov because Zelenskyy made a move, and if he admits that it was a mistake, it's a weakness. I think it's vice versa. Only strong people can admit their mistakes and recover them.
Tetiana Shevchuk, it's been an absolute pleasure from the Anti-Corruption Action Centre in Ukraine. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Right, that's all for me for now and my guests. Now it's over to you. Tell us what you think in the comments. How big a challenge is Zelenskyy facing here, or are events like this to be expected in a democratic country that's at war? Let us know.